The longer we walk this road called life, the clearer it becomes. Being intelligent has nothing to do with knowing everything or speaking the loudest. Real intelligence? It's quieter, sharper. It shows up in the pauses, in the things we choose not to say. A man who's been through fire doesn't waste breath proving himself. He's made mistakes. He's faced loss. He's been tested. And because of that, he speaks with intention. He understands that some words don't just fall flat. They damage trust, invite conflict, or silently drain the power he's spent years building. That's what separates the wise from the reckless. The ability to hold back, to observe before reacting, to know that not every thought deserves a voice. In today's conversation, we're peeling back the curtain on 7 things a truly intelligent man never says. Not out of fear, not out of ego, but because experience has shown him that certain phrases, however common, can betray his maturity, diminish his presence, or sabotage the life he's worked so hard to create. If you're a man who values strength over showmanship, peace over pride, and legacy over noise, then you're in the right place. Get comfortable. This isn't just advice. It's a recalibration of how powerful your silence can be. Number 1, I already know that it's subtle, almost innocent. But behind those 4 words is something that can quietly close the door on growth. On the surface, it sounds confident, but confidence without humility quickly turns to arrogance. And arrogance, especially in a man past his youth, isn't power. It's limitation. There was a time in my life when I thought experience meant I had nothing left to learn. I was working with a man nearly twice my age, a man who had seen more than I had the wisdom to ask about. He began to explain something I thought I had already mastered. Without thinking, I cut him off. Yeah, I know. He paused, not out of offense, but out of understanding. He said nothing more. But what stayed with me wasn't what he said. It was what he didn't. That silence carried the weight of a lesson I wasn't ready to hear. I had mistaken familiarity for mastery, and in doing so, I had shut the door on a different way of seeing. You see, real learning isn't about the information. It's about the lens. The same truth, seen through another man's experience, can reveal something you never would have noticed on your own. The older I get, the more I realize that wisdom doesn't come from repeating what you already know. It comes from remaining open to how much more there is to understand. A man grounded in himself doesn't need to interrupt to assert his knowledge. He listens, not because he lacks answers, but because he respects the complexity of life. He knows that knowledge isn't fixed. It evolves, just like we do. And sometimes, all it takes is a small shift in perspective to change the way we live, lead, or love. So the next time you feel that reflex, to cut someone off, to prove what you already know, pause. Let it pass. Listen anyway. Not because they're wiser, but because you are. Because wisdom doesn't come from always having the answer. It comes from being willing to hear the question again, from a different voice, with a deeper ear. And in that moment, you're not just learning. You're leading, quietly, powerfully, and without saying a word too many. That's the kind of intelligence that earns respect, not attention. The kind that strengthens you from within, long after the conversation has ended. Stay with me, and we'll keep uncovering these quiet shifts, each one a step toward the man you're still becoming. Number 2, that's impossible. There's a kind of man we all meet at some point in life. Sharp suit, sharper words. Walks into the room with certainty, rarely hesitates, often admired. Years ago, I worked with a man like that. Let's call him Daniel. On the surface, he was everything the modern world respects: experienced, articulate, composed. But over time, something subtle revealed itself. Not in what he said, but in what he always said when the stakes were high. It can't be done. Not we need more planning. Not let's think it through. Just that quiet, final judgment. And every time someone proposed an idea that stepped outside the boundaries of what was comfortable, he leaned on it like a crutch. It can't be done. 3 words, spoken with conviction, but not courage. I didn't question it at first. In fact, I admired his decisiveness. But the longer I watched him operate, the more I understood. He wasn't declaring reality. He was reinforcing the walls of his own comfort zone. The phrase wasn't about the task at hand. It was about self-protection, about never risking being wrong. Men like Daniel don't live without intelligence. They often have plenty. What they lack is space for uncertainty. And that's where growth dies. You see, the real danger for a man isn't failure. It's calcification. When the mind stops entertaining the possibility of change, it starts to harden. What once was cautious realism becomes quiet resignation. The words sound measured, but behind them is a mind that's already decided the outcome, before life even has a chance to prove otherwise. Philosophies like Stoicism were never about denying fear. They were about seeing it clearly, naming it, and then choosing action anyway. To a Stoic, fear disguised as logic is the most dangerous kind, because it flatters the ego while starving the soul. Years later, I found myself leading a project that looked like a mistake on paper. We had limited resources, little time, and a goal no one believed in. I remembered Daniel's words echoing in my head. It can't be done. But instead of repeating them, I asked something simpler. What's the one thing we can do today? That question didn't solve everything, but it shifted the energy. We moved, slowly at first. And with every step, something remarkable happened. Not in the world around us, but inside us. The fear shrank. The resistance softened. We realized that the mountain hadn't changed. We had. Real courage doesn't always roar. Often, it whispers. It says try anyway. Not because success is guaranteed, but because refusing to try is a far greater loss. A wise man understands this. He knows that impossible is often just a word used by those unwilling to stretch. He knows the world is shaped not by those who had all the answers, but by those who kept walking in the dark, one careful step at a time. When a man makes a habit of dismissing possibility, he doesn't just close doors, he narrows his own life. But when he stays open, curious, quietly persistent, he finds that most barriers weren't walls after all. They were mirrors. And once he steps through them, he begins to see himself, truly, for the first time. That's not bravado. That's not false hope. That's discipline. That's inner strength. And that's the kind of wisdom life doesn't hand out freely. It's earned, slowly, by men who stop asking what's possible and start asking what's necessary. And that, in the end, is how real men move forward, not with certainty, but with resolve. Number 3, I'm too old for that. There's a moment in a man's life, not marked by any birthday or calendar, that begins the slow fading of possibility. It rarely announces itself. It doesn't come with crisis or ceremony. It arrives quietly, cloaked in a casual comment, maybe even a laugh. I'm too old for that now. It sounds harmless, sensible even. But that phrase, spoken half in jest, half in surrender, isn't just language. It's a boundary, not imposed by the world, but drawn from within. And the danger isn't in saying it once. It's in letting it become part of who you are. Many men, especially those who've carried the weight of responsibility for decades, begin to feel that the time for adventure, for risk, for reinvention, belongs to younger men. That now, with mortgages, gray at the temples, and a history of both wins and wounds behind them, their work is to maintain, not to pursue, to preserve, not to grow. But this is where the quiet lie takes root. The lie that your best days are behind you, that dreams have expiration dates, that meaning is something you once had, but no longer get to chase. Stoic wisdom offers a different view. It teaches us that life isn't something that diminishes with age. It's something that reveals itself more deeply as we grow. The man who has lived, who has struggled, endured, and stood up again, doesn't need to climb mountains to prove his strength. But he must not stop climbing altogether. Your body may not be what it was. Your days may be shaped by structure, not spontaneity. But your soul, the part of you that longs to build, to create, to leave something better than it was, that does not age. That part of you is eternal, and its silence is not peace. Its potential being buried alive. I once knew a man in his 80s. His name was Jonathan. He had retired from a long, honest life of work in the trades. Everyone around him had accepted the story, that he had done enough, and now was his time to rest. But Jonathan didn't believe in enough. One day, he began volunteering at a local high school, teaching woodworking to boys who had never held a tool in their hands. Not because he needed to, because he could. Within a year, those boys had built benches for the community park. Within 2, Jonathan had taught over 100 students. At 90, he was still showing up, steady, patient, alive. He didn't speak about purpose. He lived it. And when asked why he kept going, his answer was simple. Because I still have time, and I won't waste it. This isn't about chasing youth. It's about refusing to betray what time has given you. Perspective, patience, resilience. These are not signs of a life winding down. They are the very tools needed to build what truly lasts. Aging doesn't close the door to significance. It opens a different one that asks not how fast you can run, but how deeply you can walk. Not how loud your voice is, but how much weight your presence carries. Marcus Aurelius didn't ask whether he felt young enough to keep living with virtue. He reminded himself daily, until life leaves you, live it well. Stoicism was never a philosophy for the young. It was a compass for the enduring. A guide for those who knew that every day is still a choice. So the next time your mind offers the phrase, "I'm too old for that," pause. Not to argue, but to ask, is that really the truth? Or is that comfort dressed up as certainty? Because as long as your heart still beats, and your hands can still shape something, there's still something that can be done. Something only you can do. Not in spite of your age, but because of it. What you build now may not be fast or flashy, but it can be lasting. It can be honest. It can be exactly what the world needs, and what you've spent your whole life preparing to give. And that is the work of a man who is not finished. Number 4, I'll do it later. There's a quiet phrase that often passes unnoticed, slipping past our lips without resistance. I'll handle it later. It feels rational, responsible even, as though we're simply managing our time, organizing life into tidy compartments. But the truth is harder to face. That phrase isn't about timing, it's about avoidance. Later is where our unspoken truths, unfinished work, and unlived lives often go to wait and to die. It lulls us into thinking we're in control when we're actually retreating. And for men who have spent their lives carrying responsibility, it can be the most dangerous illusion that there will always be more time, that we can afford to wait to mend what's broken, to say what needs saying, to live what we've quietly postponed. I once knew a man, let's call him James, mid-50s, self-made, respected. He built a career from nothing, provided for his family, and earned the admiration of everyone around him. But his life had one blind spot. He was always in motion, always preparing for the next phase, the next goal. And like so many of us, he believed he'd eventually return to the things that really mattered, the friends he meant to call, the stories he meant to write, the father he meant to visit. And then one day, without drama or warning, his chance was gone. His father passed while James was stuck in traffic, thinking he had more time. He shared this with me not as a tragedy, but as a reckoning. I spent years chasing everything, thinking I was being strong, he told me. But I didn't realize I was postponing what was irreplaceable. That conversation has stayed with me for years. The Stoics never promised that we would have tomorrow. They didn't preach panic. They preached precision. They knew that time isn't a resource we store. It's a current we either move with or drown beneath. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that he could leave life at any moment, not to live in fear, but to live with purpose, to speak the words now, to act now, to forgive now, because hesitation can turn into a habit, and a habit, left unchecked, becomes a way of life. I've lived that mistake. I've delayed hard conversations, waited for the right time to chase something meaningful, left apologies unsaid because the discomfort felt too sharp. But what I've learned, and am still learning, is this: regret is not caused by what we fail to achieve. It's caused by what we never begin. And beginning doesn't require the perfect moment. It requires the moment that exists, the one in front of you. There's a quiet kind of freedom that comes when a man decides to stop delaying, when he stops performing strength and starts practicing presence, when he recognizes that the most powerful move he can make is not to wait, but to step forward now, even with uncertainty in his hands. So the next time you feel yourself reaching for that familiar thought, "I'll deal with it later," stop. Ask yourself honestly, what is the real cost of waiting? And what might be possible if I no longer did? Because life isn't waiting for you to be ready. It's waiting for you to show up. Number 5, that's just how I am. There's a certain phrase men often use as a shield, a line that sounds firm, confident, even honest. It's just who I am. It gets spoken when we lose our temper, when we avoid emotion, when we shut the door on personal accountability. It's said with a shrug or a sigh, as if the matter has been settled. But let's not confuse resignation with truth, because that phrase, that's not a statement of identity. It's a verdict, a quiet way of saying, I have decided not to try anymore. Men who have walked through failure, through fatherhood, through years of success and setback, know this: we are not finished products. We are not bound by the limits of who we've been. We are not the temper we inherited or the fears we were taught. What we are, what we truly are, is whatever we continue to choose day after day. And if we stop choosing, if we settle into a version of ourselves we no longer question, then we've already begun to decay. I've sat across from men in their 50s, 60s, even 70s, who still carried the weight of choices made decades earlier, but not because they couldn't change. It was because somewhere along the way, They decided not to. They confused comfort with acceptance and routine with character. They assumed who they were at 40 would be who they had to remain at 60. But that's not strength. That's stagnation. The Stoic philosophers, men who faced war, exile, and loss, never once declared that human nature was an excuse. In fact, they taught the opposite, that our nature is to improve, to refine, to become more aligned with reason and virtue as we mature. Not because others demand it, but because we owe it to ourselves. Epictetus reminded his students that we're disturbed not by things, but by the meaning we assign to them. And often, the story we assign to ourselves becomes the biggest obstacle of all. Change isn't a sign of weakness. It's proof of awareness. And awareness, when coupled with discipline, becomes transformation. Not overnight. Not through perfection, but through consistent, intentional steps toward a man you won't be ashamed to look back on. If you've ever told yourself, "This is just who I am," stop and ask, is that the full truth? Or is it a story you've told to avoid the discomfort of growth? Because growth is painful. It asks something from us. It demands that we revisit old wounds, challenge long-held beliefs, and take ownership of behavior that was easier to justify than to change. But the reward is peace. Not the peace that comes from avoidance, but the peace that comes from integrity. A man who embraces growth in the second half of life, who doesn't run from his past but uses it as fuel. He doesn't just live differently. He leads differently. He fathers differently. He loves more deeply. And perhaps most importantly, he respects himself without needing to be praised for it. So don't settle into who you were. Refuse the comfort of the phrase, "That's just how I am." Instead, start asking, who could I become if I took full responsibility for my own evolution? Because the man who keeps growing, quietly, humbly, persistently, is the one who earns something most never find: freedom from the version of himself that fear tried to preserve. And that freedom is where wisdom begins. Number 6, I don't need any help. There's a moment in every man's life, usually unspoken, when he tells himself, "I'll carry this alone." Not because he has to, but because somewhere along the way, he came to believe that asking for help was an admission of failure. We learn it early, don't we? That real men stand tall. That real men don't complain. That strength means silence, and struggle is just part of the job. And so we nod through pain, smile through exhaustion, and tell the world we're fine, while something quietly burns inside. But here's the truth, and it's one that many of us don't realize until life forces the lesson on us. Carrying it all doesn't make you stronger. It makes you smaller. It cuts you off from others, from peace, from yourself. I've seen this firsthand. A close friend of mine, a man who by every visible measure was solid, family, career, reputation, began to unravel, not all at once, but in small, almost invisible ways. He started missing calls, losing sleep, growing distant. He was unraveling under the weight of expectations he never shared. And he did it with the same stubborn conviction so many of us hold. I should be able to handle this. But no one ever told us that should can be a prison. We don't admire men who collapse, but we've made it nearly impossible for men to not collapse, because we've glorified the very thing that wears them down: isolation. Even in ancient times, the wisest men didn't live in solitude. The Stoics, those often misunderstood as emotionally distant, were anything but alone. They lived in communities, served in families, worked alongside friends and rivals alike. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man of his time, wrote not to celebrate his independence, but to remind himself of those who shaped his thinking. Gratitude, not ego, filled his journal. He knew that no man builds a life of wisdom on his own. And yet here we are, generations later, still clinging to the lie that we have to go it alone. I know it because I lived it. I know what it's like to be the man others lean on, but never lean yourself. To be praised for your resilience, even as your inner world begins to break apart. For a long time, I thought I had to protect everyone else from my burden. What I didn't see was that no one had asked me to. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. One conversation, one moment of honesty with a friend. I didn't even say much, just, "I'm not doing well." And that simple truth, spoken aloud, opened a door I didn't know I'd closed. He didn't fix it. He didn't try. But he sat with me. And in that presence, I understood something I'd never known before. Asking for help isn't weakness. It's trust. It's courage. It's proof that you're still willing to fight for yourself. As men, we pride ourselves on being dependable. But the question we often avoid is this: are we willing to let others depend on us if we've never learned to depend on them? Real strength isn't measured by how much you can carry. It's measured by how willing you are to put something down and allow someone else to carry it with you. This is not about abandoning your responsibilities. It's about honoring your limits before they break you. It's about rejecting the myth that manhood means martyrdom. So the next time you feel the urge to say, "I've got this, I don't need anyone," take a breath. Ask yourself, is this strength, or is it fear hiding behind a strong face? Because sometimes, the bravest thing a man can do isn't to fight harder. It's to let himself be seen. And when you do that, not only do you free yourself from the burden of pretending, you give the men around you permission to do the same. And that, right there, is how a new kind of strength begins. One built not on silence, but on truth. Not on isolation, but on brotherhood. Number 7, that's not my fault. There's a subtle phrase that slips into our lives when things go wrong. It doesn't sound angry or dramatic. In fact, it sounds calm, reasonable even. That wasn't my fault. We say it when the deal collapses, when the relationship turns cold, when something important slips through our fingers. And to be fair, sometimes we're right. External forces do play their part. But here's the hard truth. Every time we default to that line, we give something away, something essential. We give away ownership of our future. It's easy to fall into the trap. After all, no one wants to carry more weight than they should. But there's a difference between carrying unnecessary blame and refusing to examine your own role in what went wrong. One is protection. The other is avoidance. When a man distances himself from responsibility, he also distances himself from growth. The cost is subtle, but it's real. Missed insights, repeated patterns, and the slow erosion of inner power. I once had a conversation with a man I respected. Let's call him Thomas. He had just lost a leadership role he'd worked years to earn. When we talked, he listed every factor that led to it: changing priorities, misaligned team dynamics, even politics at the executive level. And while he wasn't wrong, something in his tone struck me. He was reciting events, not reflecting on them. He never asked the deeper question: what part of this could I have anticipated? Managed differently? Seen sooner? Not because he was to blame for everything, but because refusing to take any ownership meant he also refused to take anything useful with him. No lessons, no growth, just frustration and silence. The Stoics never told us to absorb the world's faults. They didn't ask us to wear guilt like armor. What they taught was far more profound, that every event, no matter how unfair, holds a mirror. And in that mirror is a chance to know ourselves better, to become wiser, stronger, clearer. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled through war, plague, and betrayal, wrote not about controlling others, but about mastering his own reactions. His strength didn't come from dominance. It came from discipline, from humility, from the relentless pursuit of self-governance. Real strength, especially the kind that endures past youth, isn't about pointing fingers. It's about looking inward and asking, what could I have done differently? That question isn't weakness. It's a gateway. In my own life, every meaningful change began not when things went my way, but when I was willing to admit where I had failed. Failed to listen. Failed to prepare. Failed to speak the truth when it mattered. And those moments, painful as they were, gave me something blame never could. Clarity. Responsibility, when chosen, not forced, is liberating. It puts your hands back on the wheel. It shifts your posture from passive to active. And it sends a quiet but powerful message to the people around you. I am not afraid of the truth, even when that truth is about me. So the next time your instinct is to deflect, to defend, to say, this wasn't my fault, pause. Not to shame yourself, but to ask a deeper question. What part of this can I learn from? What part of this can I own? Not because I must, but because I can. Because the man who takes responsibility, not as punishment, but as practice, becomes the kind of man others can count on, and the kind of man he can count on himself. And that kind of man doesn't just weather life, he shapes it. Thank you for taking the time to watch. If something in this video spoke to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment, and let's keep the conversation going. And if you found value here, consider subscribing to the channel. There's more to come. More insight, more reflection, and more of the wisdom we all need to grow stronger together.